We are living in the 21st century, but can an 18th century philosophy help us live a better and happier life? Well, my guest today believes it can, and he has advocated the 18th century enlightenment in his book titled Happiness Lessons from a New Science. Richard Layard is professor emeritus at the London School of Economics. He thinks there is more to happiness than just the economy. He is a co-editor of the World Happiness Report released by the United Nations every year and a co-founder of Action for Happiness, which is a global movement promoting a happier way of living. He is also a member of the House of Lords. Today, I will talk to him about why nations, especially in the West, have become richer but not happier in the last 50 to 60 years, and also the factors that truly make people happy. Professor Richard, welcome to the program and thanks for joining me.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you. So let's start. This interview is based on your book, Happiness Lessons from a New Science. So my first question, the first part of the interview is about the problems that we have about happiness, and the second part will be about the solutions and suggestions. So my first question to you is, a basic criticism of happiness rankings is that happiness cannot be measured because it's an intangible feeling, as they say. But you explained in your book, Happiness Lessons from a New Science, that scientific breakthroughs, especially in brain science, have made it possible to measure happiness objectively. So tell us about this new science.
Well, as you say, the first issue is measurement. And what we find is that actually, if you ask people questions about how happy they are, how satisfied they are with their lives, they give very meaningful answers. And in fact, if you think about it, it'd be very odd if human beings could communicate with each other about everything except their inner state. So what we find is that if you ask people questions like, how satisfied are you with your life? You will find that it is a very good predictor of many things, objectively. So it's a very good predictor, for example, of how long you'll live. It's a very good predictor of how you will vote. It's a very good predictor of whether you'll quit your job. So we know there is a serious information content, but of course we're interested in happiness, not because it causes other things, but because it's the ultimate reality for all of us. And that is where the science is focused. The science is focused on finding the causes of the answers that people give to these questions. And we now have had over about 40 years a build-up of a mass of knowledge about what things are more important and what things are less important. And of course, as you said just now, it's not only the economy. In fact, it's very much more, number one, health, mental health as important as physical health. Number two, relationships, human relationships in your family, at your workplace, important, and in the community. And actually, the income in most countries is then coming after those other factors, even in poorer countries as well as in richer countries. So I think that this is a very important message to policymakers, that they should pay a lot of attention to health, a lot of attention to the personal factors which enable people to make good relationships if they are taught how to do that at an early stage in their life. The priorities of policymakers will have to change if we take into account the objective of happiness.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. So rich people are happier than the poor on average. However, average happiness has not increased in the West in the last 50 to 60 years, although average income has risen significantly during this period. So this is a paradox. And what led to this paradox? Can you explain?
Well, I think the basic problem is that people are comparing themselves with other people. That's an inbuilt human trait that we do it. Of course, we should try to reduce it. But we compare ourselves with other people. So imagine a society, this is the so-called Easterlin paradox. So if you compare the richer and poorer people in a society at one point in time. The richer people are happier because they're comparing themselves with the national average, let's say. But suppose that the whole society becomes richer, the national average with which people are comparing themselves is rising at the same rate as everybody's individual income. And so they don't become happier because the norm against which they assess their income is rising at the same rate as their actual income. This is the basic dynamic. Now, I think these things can be overcome to some extent by changes in attitude. And we do see, and I think this is important also to mention, we do see that people in richer countries are happier than in poorer countries, probably not at all exclusively because of the higher income, but because they have been able to build good institutions, better relationships of trust between people, better in general, better ways of living and interacting than is possible. So I think that economic growth is a sensible thing to include in your objectives, but absolutely not something which you should sacrifice other things too much in order to obtain. So I think in poor countries, really, the budget should have probably more devoted to health, more devoted to education in good, not only good abilities to produce income, but good values, good relationships, proper attitude to women, and so on. These are very, very central to a happy society as well as income.
Yeah, I understand. And as you explained, the human trait of comparison, so we are always comparing ourselves with other members of the society. And in your book, to explain why happiness has not increased with economic growth, so you mentioned these two factors: social comparison, as you discussed, and another thing is habituation. So can you tell us about that habituation? How does it affect happiness?
Well, of course, the psychologists are particularly interested in habituation. But obviously, if people got completely habituated to their income, it couldn't be the case that in a society at one point in time, richer people are happier than poorer people, because everybody would have got used to whatever they had. So I think the role of habituation can be exaggerated as compared with the role of social comparisons in explaining this paradox.
Yeah, I understand. And I really loved one example that you gave about yourself. So you wrote that you grew up with central heating and it was fine at the time. Sometimes you had to huddle over the fire or put your feet in a bowl of hot water. And when you were 40, you got central heating, and now you'd feel really miserable if you had to fight the cold as you once did in the past. So that explains how people get habituated and how people adapt to certain facilities and amenities when they get that in their lives. And once you have some kind of facilities, if it's taken from you, then you feel miserable and your happiness level drops. Is that it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. People very much compare themselves to the status quo, as it were. And this is one of the great discoveries of the psychologist Daniel Kahneman, who won the Nobel Prize. Empirically, he was able to show that people suffer much more that when they experience, say, a given drop in income, than they gain in happiness from the same amount of additional income as they might have otherwise lost. So this is very much the point, that people are comparing themselves to a status quo.
Yeah, I understand. Thanks. You also said in your book that the race for status is a zero-sum game. So how does this affect happiness, and how can we make people abstain from this zero-sum game?
Well, as I say, it's a human trait. We can try and fight it. My belief is, that we may come to this later, that there are some countries in which the degree to which people compare themselves with other people is less than in other countries. So, for example, the Scandinavian countries have very strong egalitarian culture. You're not meant to be trying to stand out from everybody else. You're meant to exploit the things you have in common with other people rather than try and show how different you are. This produces less of this comparison. But going back to your question, obviously, just forget inequality for a moment. Let's imagine everybody was the same. But if I'm trying to raise myself relative to everybody else, and everybody else is doing the same, none of us succeed. We all end up in the same relative position as before. But we've been working our backs off. So it would obviously be a better situation if we didn't work so hard just to try and get ahead of other people. And I think that is what people mean when they talk about the rat race. It's a kind of fruitless endeavor of everybody to get ahead of everybody else. And you ask, how can we reduce it? Well, I think one obvious thing is to reduce the income rewards for extra work through the tax system. And there's a standard proposition in tax theory that if somebody, through their actions, is hurting somebody else, for example, as I try and raise my income, I hurt the other people who are competing with me, then that's a proper object to tax, because I'm polluting other people by insisting on working harder. So I think it's quite reasonable to think of tax as having a corrective function, as well as just raising money to pay for public services. So in economics, there's a tendency to say that taxes are very inefficient. But I think this is one sense in which they can actually make the economy more efficient.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember you wrote it in your book that some people think the taxation actually perpetuates the class system in England. But you said this is nonsense, because if you go to Scandinavia and the Nordic countries, so they have some of the highest tax rates in the world, and they don't have any class system in the city. It's almost egalitarian, and everyone is equal and everyone is the same. So as you're saying, taxation, of course, plays a role in abstaining people from participating in this zero-sum game from status or higher income or higher positions in the society, because no matter how hard you try, the net gain, the end net gain is always there if everyone is competing against each other, right? So that's a very important point.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. So we have been talking about problems so far. Now let's talk about the solutions. And in your book, you said that Jeremy Bentham's idea of greatest happiness is right. And you said we should fearlessly adopt it and apply it to our lives. So I want to know, what is the principle of greatest happiness?
Well, the principle of greatest happiness is that the best situation is the one where there is the most happiness that's possible, given all the limitations that we have in our situation. So this is a principle that his great book was called Principles of Morals and Legislation. It's a principle, first, for how we individuals should conduct our lives. How should we conduct our lives? We should be trying to produce the most happiness in the world that we can. Of course, it includes our own happiness, but we are one and the others are many. Of course, there is some important payoff to the individual if they are pro-social, because the evidence is that people who are pro-social are happier. But the reason The main reason to be pro-social is the benefit to the other people. So that's a really kind of fundamental principle of ethics, which I personally think is inspiring. And I think it's what we should be saying to young people. Why should I be kind? I should be kind because it makes other people happy. Not you should be kind, period. But why should you be kind? Just use your imagination. And how to be kind is not always totally obvious. How to be kind is the thing which creates the most happiness for other people. So I think it's a tremendously inspiring principle for individuals, obviously in the conduct of your daily life, but also the big decisions you make about what job to do. You should choose a job which you think will create the most happiness in the world that you can. And of course, it's also a principle for legislators. So for governments, they have to make a choice about how to spend money, how to regulate our lives, and so on. Each of these decisions should be based on the attempt by the government to produce the most happiness in the population as possible. And I would add, especially to alleviate the most extreme cases of unhappiness. So I would not just say, let's look at just average happiness. We should also try and reduce the spread of happiness so that there's not much misery at the bottom end. I think that is the only coherent theory of government, because obviously you can't judge the priorities as between all the different claims from education, health, defense, etc., unless you have some single overarching principle that you're comparing those claims against. And the only serious idea for that overarching principle is the happiness of the people. So this is such an extraordinarily wide and inspiring principle that I think should just be, part of our basic mental furniture in our private lives and in, the public lives who we vote for in elections, and if we are connected with government, how we make government policy.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you. And really, it's very inspiring. As I read about this greatest happiness principle in your book, I really liked it. And it really has big similarities with the idea of happiness in the Scandinavian nations, as I lived in Finland for 3 years. So equality, trust, these are the basic building blocks of happiness, you can say, as I have seen in the Finnish society. And they're really very serious about it, especially the equality factor, because they want to maintain equality at all levels in the society and also in their personal lives. So there is no compromise on equality. And I think that's one of the key reasons why these nations are ranked among the happiest year after year, especially in the World Happiness Report. So anyway, you have identified 7 factors in your book that mainly make people happy, and you call them the big 7. And they are family relationships, financial situation, work, community and friends, health, personal freedom, and personal values. So can you tell us more about why and how these elements affect happiness so much? Because we talked about money, we talked about economic growth, so they have not made us happy, as the data shows. But you said in your book, this sounds like very mundane and trivial things. If I talk to someone about happiness, and if I say, hey, if you have strong family relationships, it will actually make you happier. And you know what? That person might say, really? I mean, I have never thought about it that way. I thought having more economic growth or, always trying to improve my position and income relative to others in society would make me happier. But these are the building blocks of happiness. So can you tell us more about this?
Well, of course, income is very, what they call salient. It's very, very, very obvious. but actually any form of introspection is going to tell you. If you think of what things have made you miserable over the last 7 days or seven months, I think certainly for most people, including people who are quite poor, it'll be quarrels in the family, things that are very, very personal, or it'll be to do with health, or it'll be to do with your boss at work. These kind of things are very, very important and need to be taken very seriously. But we know this also not from introspection, but from research. So we've got all these surveys where we can look at the effect of all these different factors simultaneously on a person's happiness. These factors are very good at explaining the inequality in happiness within a society, within a country. So as I was saying before, these health items, the relationship ones, always come through as more important than income. But then there are also the differences between whole societies. And that's a feature of the World Happiness Report that you mentioned, that each year there's an analysis of how things like freedom that you just mentioned, or corruption, or how much there is social support within the country, how much charitable activity there is. All these things also affect the happiness of a population. So it's not just individual factors working on individuals, it's the overall ethos and customs and practices of the country, which also matter very much indeed.
Yeah, I understand. And also, you talked about alcoholism, depression, and the family breakup in nations that negatively affect happiness. So I think that also explains why nations, especially in the West, as you reference those nations in your book, so why these nations have become richer but have not actually become happier, because these are the factors, and as they are especially related to raising your happiness. So when they are negatively affected, it ultimately negatively affects your happiness level, because if you have problems in your family relationships or work or community, if you cannot trust people in your community, in the society where you are living in, so it actually decreases your level of happiness, and it happens across the society, right?
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
Thank you. So you said in your book that individualism has not increased happiness, and if we want to be happy, we need some concept of a common good towards which we all will contribute. So with this, my question is, do you suggest a major shift in culture, like from individualism to collectivism?
Well, I think that we're suffering all over the world, and especially you see it in the United States and then Britain, and it's washing over into Europe, a growth of what you might call a macho culture, which is where people are told that, even in school, they're told this, your job in life is to be more successful than other people in terms of your income, getting a good job, getting good grades in school, maybe even getting a good partner. Everything is the objective of life is defined in terms of you doing better than other people. Now, this, as you pointed out earlier on, is a zero-sum game, because if for every person who's successful, there has to be someone who's less successful. So we've got to get away from that into a positive-sum game where people are getting their happiness from the feeling that they're contributing to the happiness of others. And I think that's the complete culture change we need from this very macho show-off kind of culture, which is being encouraged so much. It's also being encouraged on social media, unfortunately, to one which is based more on how do I get my satisfaction? I get it from feeling I'm doing something really helpful for other people, and I don't have to show that I'm better. I have to show that I'm doing something to myself. I have to show to myself I'm doing something that I really feel is worthwhile.
Yeah, I understand. And now let's talk about something that I read in your book and that really touched me personally. So, you have mentioned in your book and also in the TED Talk that the most miserable time for a person during the day on average is the time spent with the boss. So, what steps should organization take to improve this situation? And I told you this personally touched me because I have worked under bosses that are not very inspiring, and also I have worked under bosses who are very inspiring. So I have seen both sides of the coin. So now I want to know from you what steps you think organizations should take to improve this situation.
Well, I think one thing, obviously, is more collective decision making within teams. So there's been a trial, an experiment led from MIT, where teams that were previously done whatever way, but it was typically the team leader not consulting as much as the alternative, which is where all decisions are discussed collectively, both from the point of view of what is the best from the point of view of the firm to actually the most efficient way to achieve its objectives, but also what is most enjoyable from the point of view of the members of the team. And this led to a big increase in satisfaction, a big reduction in quitting from the teams that were engaged in this new way of working. So that's one thing. I think other things to avoid are individual performance-related pay, where you have forced ranking of people in teams. This is inhumane and barbarous and demoralizes more than it incentivizes, and causes great distress. So, yeah, we've got to achieve more people need to get more of their satisfaction from the performance of their team. People actually enjoy playing in teams, and modern management theory tends to set one member of the team against the others, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I understand. And I was also reading one of your articles on the Guardian newspaper website, and there you wrote that giving workers more influence over how their work is organized, paying team workers on the basis of team, as you discussed, measuring worker well-being, appointing managers who can inspire and lead, and running courses on well-being at work for all workers and taking mental illness seriously. These are actually the steps that organizations can take to improve this situation. So these are very important, right? As you said.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. So I have the last question for you. I have 6 minutes and we have to finish.
I want to make sure we talk about action for happiness. Is your last question? Is it about it?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yes.
Because I mean, I think that it's very difficult to lead your life well in isolation. It's much easier if you're doing it in a situation where you meet up with like-minded people who are trying to pursue the same values and the same principles. So that's why we founded Action for Happiness, to try and get people to live in the way that I was talking about earlier on. So every member pledges that they will try to live in a way that produces the most happiness in the world that they can, and as little unhappiness. And then we have all kinds of courses as to how people can manage their own happiness and improve their empathy for other people. Then we have groups who form, has been recently mainly online, but also, of course, we hope face-to-face. We have very good courses. A course has been evaluated in a proper trial, and it showed to increase people's happiness by more than, for example, when they found a partner or a job from being unemployed. So you really can. I think the simple point I'm making is not just about action for happiness, but please Google that, but about the fact that you can your thinking pattern. You can change your thinking pattern. This is a basic discovery of modern psychology. You can change your thinking pattern in a way that makes you feel better and the people with whom you interact feel better. And that is a very, very important tool that we have for building a better world.
Yeah, I understand. And thank you, Professor Richard. Thank you for your time. And when I emailed you, I was thinking like you are such a high profile person. Would you respond to my email and give me some time to interview? And I'm really happy.
It's been a huge pleasure talking to you, and you've asked such good questions. And I hope that you and everybody else who's listening will go away and maybe try and apply some of these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I have plans to go to Finland for a master's degree, maybe next year or the year after that. And if I go there and if I have time, I will come to England. And
please.
I really want to meet you if you have time.
No, please, I'd love to do that. What a good idea.
Yeah, and we'll have more discussion.
What will you study?
I will study maybe media or journalism or like communication or something like that, because my passion lies in this. And also I want to write books and, I want to establish a career in the field of media and journalism because I really love writing. It's my passion.
I can see you have a good analytic brain also, which is not true of all journalists or writers. It's a great asset.
Thank you. Because I have always been, I learned speaking English by watching and listening to the BBC. It was like it was like 15 or 16 years ago. So I was listening to the BBC. I was watching BBC programs on TV. I really love the BBC Hard Talk presented by Stephen Sacker. I think he's a great.
It's very good.
He is really good. So I was always trying to, learn how to speak English because I understood that if I can speak English, it will actually broaden my horizon and I can actually communicate with people from almost any part of the world. So I started learning English 15 years ago, like my life really depended on it. And now after 16 years, I am interviewing someone like you. So, that actually makes me happy. So I really did a very good investment.
Very good luck. And come to me.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye, Professor Richard. Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.